How would you feel if you couldn't move, stretch your legs, or turn around for the next few hours? Your phone's battery was about to run out and the signal was extremely poor. This is a low-cost, high box office movie. Some netizens commented that there have never been so few actors in such a small space and such pitiful props to torture so many audiences in the darkness. There was deathly silence all around. Paul woke up and found that his hands were tied. Fortunately, he found a lighter and lit it. Only then did Paul realize that he was in a small coffin in a desperate situation. Paul knew he had to find a way to save himself. Paul used the nails on the coffin to break the cloth strips binding his hands, and then began to hit the upper wooden boards in an attempt to open the coffin. However, the upper wooden boards showed no signs of loosening. Paul was a little desperate at this time. Suddenly, the phone vibrated and the screen lit up. Paul spent a lot of effort to get the mobile phone from the sole of his foot. Paul immediately wanted to call the emergency number provided by the company. Paul is a truck driver employed by a company that has business dealings with Iraq. Paul's job is to travel from the United States to Iraq to help the company deliver goods. Unexpectedly, during the delivery mission, Paul's convoy was attacked by Iraqi insurgents. 6 of Paul's colleagues were brutally murdered and 1 was missing. The emergency number is provided by the company to respond to dangerous situations. Unfortunately, Paul forgot his emergency number. Therefore, Paul could only call 911, the U.S. police hotline, and urgently describe his experience to the police. However, the 911 line Paul connected was not the one responsible for the Iraq area. The police officer tried to help Paul transfer the call to the corresponding area, but Paul found it too troublesome and hung up the call directly. Then, Paul called his wife, but she was not there, so Paul could only leave a message on the phone about his experience. Then, Paul got the FBI's call through the company's call forwarding service. Paul called the FBI and described his desperate situation to the other party. However, the other party asked questions such as Paul's social security number in a leisurely manner. Paul began to become angry, but at this moment, the call was suddenly interrupted due to signal problems. After several unsuccessful attempts to seek help, Paul was almost on the verge of collapse. At this time, Paul found the first number on his mobile phone and dialed. Unexpectedly, the other party turned out to be the terrorist who attacked Paul and his convoy. The terrorist directly said that the condition for releasing you is that you ask the embassy for a ransom of $5 million. Then Paul dialed the number of the U.S. government department. Unexpectedly, the other party directly called Paul's name. It turned out that Paul's company had reported Paul's situation, but the government did not take any action to rescue Paul. He also told Paul that the United States will never negotiate with terrorists or compromise with terrorists at the same time. I hope Paul will not announce his experience to any media. Finally, the other party gave Paul the phone number of the leader of the Iraqi rescue team. Paul called the captain directly, and the other party said that they were already trying to find him at this moment. The terrorist called Paul kept explaining that he was just an ordinary truck driver. He had a wife and children to support, and he hoped to let him go. However, the terrorist said that the 911 terrorist attacks were not their fault and Saddam's regime was not their fault. But why? They have now lost their jobs and their families after saying this. The terrorists said they were willing to reduce the ransom to $1 million, but they needed to shoot a video and post it online as required. Paul found a note at his feet, which contained a video request from the terrorists. They needed to explain Paul's own experience and that all this was caused by the U.S. government. Paul had no choice but to call the rescue team leader first and explain the current situation. The captain made it clear, "Paul, you can't do this. Otherwise the U.S. government will be disgraced internationally," and comforted Paul. They had rescued a doctor named Mark who had the same experience, and they would be able to rescue Paul right away. Time has passed and the air in the coffin is now very thin. Paul doesn't know how long he can survive. Paul called his mother, who suffered from Alzheimer's disease, to express his love for her at this time. The terrorist sent a photo of Paul's female colleague, who was holding a gun to her head. Paul had no choice but to follow the instructions on the note and shoot the video and post it online. However, after a while, the terrorist sent a video of shooting a female colleague. Paul's heart sank at this moment. Several bombs exploded and a large amount of sand poured into the coffin. Paul hurriedly blocked the gap with cloth strips. At this time, the phone's battery was running low. At this moment, Paul's company called and said that Paul had been fired from the company. In other words, if Paul died unexpectedly, the company would not bear any responsibility, and Paul's family would not receive any compensation. Hearing this, Paul felt only deep helplessness and despair. And at this moment, the sand broke through the gap blocked by the cloth strips. Paul took out his cell phone and recorded his last words. At this moment, the terrorists called again and asked Paul to shoot another video. Otherwise, they would attack Paul's wife and children. Paul could only comply with the terrorists' request and cut off his fingers and posted the video online. Paul, whose life was hanging by a thread, was in a trance and found that the sand above his head was being removed bit by bit, and someone was rescuing him. The leader of the rescue team called and said that he already knew Paul's location and would be able to rescue Paul in 3 minutes. Immediately afterwards, my wife called and reported that she and the child were safe. Paul's hope of living rekindled in his heart. Suddenly, the wooden boards above the coffin began to be pried, and then the coffin was opened. However, the captain's apology came from the other end of the phone. It turned out that the rescue team was not opening Paul's coffin at this time, but Mark, whom the captain had originally said. Following the captain's two apologies, Paul was completely buried alive in the sand. Okay, that is all for this movie. Welcome to Follow Me. See you next time.